I want to, at this moment, and maybe for the rest of this time, focus us not on the ultimate question of whether a collaborative succeeds or fails. Because there are a lot of measures. You can fail with your stated goal and still transform some of the people who went through the process. Or you can fail with both of those things and still stimulate the funders and organizers to realize they have to do it different next time and have a learning experience that may not actually come into the world for another 5 years. So I'd just like to reframe the question a bit, not so much in terms of the outcome as much as in terms of what makes it so hard. What makes it so likely that so many of those high hope collaborative efforts at the start end up with such poor sense of the gap between what they thought they could do and what they actually did. And still in my little introduction here, before I start using this, I want to make this point crystal clear. This is like at the center of my time with you. I mean, anytime you bring a group of people together, it's going to be hard. Anytime you bring a group of people together who are unfamiliar with the issue, who have to deal with something at high stakes that's got a lot of variables, and that the solution to the problem isn't already known. You've got a tough problem, not just the content problem, but you've got the group dynamics problem. Some people just don't feel comfortable talking in groups, no matter how expert they are. Some people feel shy about giving their opinions. Some people feel insecure about the way they're coming across. Some people are culturally raised not to say the most interesting things they think in groups. Some people are afraid to say what they're really thinking because of their perceived consequences of rattling the cage of whoever is in authority in the room. There are all kinds of reasons why it's very difficult to get good thinking to happen. And then there are other people who are more comfortable speaking in groups. Some people would say they're way too comfortable thinking in groups. And many of those folks who are most comfortable thinking in groups are actually comfortable doing what I'm doing right now, which is treating the rest of the group members as an audience. Now, in other words, that sweet spot where there's good listening and dialogue and interchange and movement of the thought process, that sweet spot, the more complex the issue is, that sweet spot doesn't come easily and it doesn't stay long. And that is part of what it means to be a human being. Now, take everything I just said, and now, on top of that, make a disciplined, intentional effort to fill that room with the most diverse perspectives you can, with stakeholders who are specifically chosen because they have competing agendas, interests that are opposed to each other and interests that are not so much opposed, but at least divergent from each other, with backgrounds and professional expertise in that room that people have spent 20 years becoming an expert. One in a science, one in a technology, one in a healthcare, one in a managerial. Some people, have a lifetime of living in poverty. Take people who have filled their adult lives with a background of their assumptions, their beliefs, their commitments, all unspoken. And this is all on top of the garden variety difficulties in bringing people together to think. And you've increased the scale of complexity and difficulty and challenge in a group so much. And then, on top of that, give them the task, give them the responsibility to think about an issue which, in the best case, is going to take many months to implement, sometimes a lot longer, years before the impact is felt, with all kinds of moving parts, and an economy that comes and goes in an unpredictable way, with members turning over in and out of the group, with organizations behind them that have leaders who change, leaders who make commitments in year 1, who take their commitments back in year 2 to participating in the group. Put all of the scale and big picture issues onto the shoulders of this hugely diverse group that has trouble even talking about anything for a sustained period of time, and make them responsible for traveling from the 50,000 foot level to the 10,000 foot level to the 1,000 foot level to the what are we talking about now level. And then on top of all that, have multiple locuses of power and authority, where the situation is there isn't one person except maybe God that everybody reports to. Okay, so that's what makes collaboratives difficult. Okay, now I want to spend the rest of my time with you. My goal here is my number one goal is to stimulate your thinking in terms of some of the suggestions I'm going to be offering you for how to think about the things I just described. Participatory decision making is not just a moment that happens in a room when people nod their head or signal their agreement. It's not just a point of decision. It's not even only, but it certainly includes, the entire problem solving and creative thinking and analysis and arguing and changing minds and building a shared framework of understanding. All of that is part of participatory decision making too. There is no good decision without all the rest of that thinking and communicating, including all of the messiness that could be called non-communicating. But it's also, as I just said, it's also in the context. It's in the context of all those big picture scale issues. It's like you take a boat across the ocean, you hope the weather's good, and then you hit horrible weather with huge waves. I mean, that's what it means to take a boat across the ocean. And so that's part of participatory decision making too, is being able to navigate and understand and relate to all of these variables that first time around they feel like they're completely environmental and out of your control. But actually, once you've been around the block a few times, you realize that's part of the story too. So I want you to stimulate your thinking about that whole picture and understand participatory decision making as all of it. And also along the way this afternoon, I'm going to give you a number of tools. I'm going to demonstrate some, give you a chance to see things in action, and give you a chance to think about them and talk about them. But it's more about showing than teaching how. You'll see some hows, but mostly, like I said, it's to stimulate you. So the plan is, first I want to start in the big picture. I want to give you several minutes of more clarity about collaborative architecture. I want to help you see some strategy maps and see how to think about the big picture, how you can use drawings and language to help everybody see a big picture. And then I want to bring in the role of executive authority into the architecture discussion. Once we've had a chance to digest that, then I want to go down from the big picture level down to the face-to-face group level piece of participatory decision making. And I want you to play with me as I show you my thoughts about group dynamics in a consensus building process and reaching agreement. Some people, Mid-City Can this morning mentioned that they use the tool, Gradients of Agreement, that is, Ellie was so kind as to wave that book of mine and my colleagues who wrote it. We talk about that tool a lot, and I'll show you how it works this afternoon. And then I also want to end by showing you another key piece of it, which is the process design and process management piece that has to take, or that would benefit from taking into account the above. So that's where we're going this afternoon. Okay. And by the way, I'm showing you all this. It sounds like you can get this by going to the website here. You can also get a PDF by contacting me or my assistant Lori at the back, and I'll put this email address up later again. Okay, so I want to start with strategy maps. And here I want to introduce some simple visual iconic language as a way to get us started in mapping. So here is a simple picture of a group. I call it thinking team. Imagine that what you're looking at is you know, a room full of people who are charged with thinking through something. And I want to decompose this group a little bit. What this group is meant to represent is a multi-stakeholder group, so that has different types of stakeholders in it. This is a challenging thing to represent diagrammatically. I mean, you could represent it the way you're looking at it on the screen right now, that this kind of drawing, but this is, a stranger wouldn't even exactly know what they're seeing. It's hard. So this is a problem that a close colleague of mine and I tackled 30 years ago. And in 1981, Herman Geer and I developed this picture. We call it a diagonal group. And the diagonal means the left to rightness of it means that the composition of the group is cross-functional or cross-sector. And the top to bottom means that there's multiple levels of authority in the group. And the reason I'm spending time on this icon is because you're going to see it for the rest of the slides. So when you see this, it means one of those diverse groups. And so now you'll see this kind of drawing for the rest of the time. Now, I also want to introduce another little icon, which is the work between meetings, or here's a better way to put it. Just because you have an inclusive participatory process does not mean that everybody has to be in on everything. It doesn't mean that every person has to do every homework assignment, or be on every email, or be on every phone call, or read everything the same way. Obviously, you can scope the work, and much work in a collaborative gets done by 1 or 2 or 3 people between meetings. And so, as examples, there's reading, writing, editing documents, inputting data, analyzing data, phoning or meeting with key players, or them with each other, planning future meetings, managing schedule, managing budget, managing logistics, creating and disseminating communications, and contending with revolting developments on the side. All of these things and many more don't need to be done in the thinking group proper unless there's a particular reason at a particular time. Maybe the philosophy of communication is a good one for a central group, but the actual execution of it, maybe you only get these people for a few hours at a time. So anyway, that symbol. So now I want to introduce a new concept, because here's an idea that goes like this. You can have a core group, and you can try to get as much representation and inclusion of stakeholders into the core group as is feasible, given time, location, etc. But sometimes, some of your stakeholders are not going to be able to be part of a core group for many reasons. So this picture The accordion was developed in the 1970s by Michael Doyle and David Strauss as a design, and the principle is you have a diagonal core group that develops the thinking, and you get added input from the different constituencies, and so those littler circles, they could represent focus groups, one-on-one interviews, ongoing subgroups, etc. They can represent whatever you want. Now, with this much iconography, one could start to design the process at a big picture level. I'll give you an example. Here's a picture. Here's the simplest one I could come up with. Okay, early we'll have a core group develop an idea. Then they'll go to stakeholder constituencies, get some input, then they'll refine the idea, etc. But the thing that I want you to see right here is I'm showing you a tool, a thinking tool, to be able to take a pencil and paper and sketch out what is going to be referred to as a stakeholder engagement map. To sketch out different stakeholders moving through time in different kinds of groupings. Now I'm going to introduce another icon, a large group event. This could be community town hall, an all staff meeting, a professional conference, a public hearing. If you live in New Zealand, Australia, which is a big thriving hotbed of multi-stakeholder collaboration, these are called huis. It's a Maori word, it means community gathering for the purpose of discussing and debating important ideas. So, large group event, let's put this into a process map. Here we have a picture. Now, even before I put any English words onto this map, by now, you should be able to read a vision of about 3 to 6 months of work. Okay, so here, for example, arbitrarily, data gathering, good ideas, further input, final revisions, large group rollout. There is simplest example I could think of, although this happens to be a very common approach to collaboration. Here comes a different process with a large group. Okay, this time we're going to start with clarifying the goals. Then we're going to have community input about whatever the questions are. Then from that community input, some core group will do the substance. Then they'll negotiate with key stakeholders, etc. Now, what I'm starting to show you is not only process, but in the last minute, I made a new point, which is that there are different strategies for collaboration. I showed you, for example, bring the large community in at the end was one, and now I'm showing you a different one, bring the large community in at the beginning. Here's a different one. This is a viral strategy, which is also known as a social network strategy. And here, this time, I've got a pink, you're going to see pink circles. I will get to the pink circles in another 5 minutes, but just ignore them for right now. But, okay, here's the picture of this story. There's some front-end commitment to do the rest of the process. Then there's building the platform. This is usually an expert, technical people working with end users to set up their assumptions. Are we using websites? Are we using SharePoint? How are we engaging large groups of the citizenry technologically, etc. Then this is what's understood. Test it. Get a few, and if it's a large enough group, a few might be 100. But get a few people involved, enough to test your platform, and then you're going to find out it doesn't work. They don't work. So we change it. Just like developing any product, you change it, and now you get to engage the broader community, etc. That's a different strategy. Can still be anticipated. Here's another one. This is a real-life one. Healthy Christchurch, New Zealand, a client of mine, and they got funding from the World Health Organization, which was funding cities, usually health departments of cities, to create healthy cities. And the funding, in order for the funding to be awarded to a city, you have to develop a charter which is like a healthy community vision. And health can be defined by the signatories of the charter. But there have to be at least 100 signatories, not people, but 100 power-broking institutions. So generally it's healthcare providers, healthcare recipients, could be parks and recreation, it could be, you know, however you conceptualize what makes it healthy. In the case of Healthy Christchurch, the substance abuse and schools were two big players in their healthy vision. Here's what they did. Okay, so they started out doing this front-end work with the pink circle I'll get to. That's the authority group. But now in the second stage, they convened a thinking team. Then they designed the rest of the stage at that point. Then they set an agenda for the WHOIs. They had 5 town halls in different parts of Christchurch. From there, they had task forces that identified themes that came out of the town hall meetings. They had the themes finalized. They did some substantive work. They refined the substantive work. They had, now we've gone 18 months, by the way, at this point. And I'm calling it a rollout for us. They didn't call it that. But this was a very festive event. It was a weekend party downtown. They ended up getting over 200 signatories, not people, thousands of people signed, but 200 different institutions, physicians union, all kinds of physicians, entities, district, city, different government entities. And so then they had passed their test of charter. But then they had this collaboration, which was what World Health Organization envisioned. They envisioned that if you went this far with the collaboration, something would happen. And so the next thing that happened is they went to stage 3, where they just let 1,000 flowers bloom that were collaborative in nature. So it wasn't 200 signatories sitting on one thing. It was different subgroups of people doing different things, projects, programs, associations, activities, and this stage lasted 6 years. And then, in the completion of that, stage 4, which was already understood when stage 3 started, that in stage 4, the best efforts would get strengthened, and the losers or the also-rans would be left to their own devices. But there was a community outcome assessment with recommendations, and then sponsors, the big power players, made funding decisions, essentially, which ones of these can we bring to scale? Let's give them that money. We see that they're successful. Which ones of these are almost there, but they need more help to keep working? Let's give them that money. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take any 2 or 3 comments from you just generally right now, but then I want to show you another piece, and then I want to have a more thoughtful discussion with you having a chance to talk in small groups and then large. But right now, to just tee up any 2 or 3 comments, I want to make sure you've got a key point that I've made so far, which is there's lots of creativity, lots of variation, lots of options. When you think at a big picture level, there's not 1 or 2 right ways to put together big groups, small groups, intergroups, task force groups. There's not 1 right time. There's not 1 right stage. It's a creative judgment call, and you can redesign as you go along. So, comments? Yes?
If you can stand up.
So were those mind maps done prospectively, or were those retrospectively drawn?
Some of each. I mean, I'm gonna be able to get a little bit practical in the answer to your question in the next round, but I want my clients to be able to do a first draft before very much money and people's time gets spent at all. And then you make a more careful commitment to the early stage, and you make a more, we'll see what happens when we get there, commitment to the later stages, because you already know it's going to change. And this is just at the big picture level. Same principle is true at every level down to the ground. The thing that we're going to do tomorrow, let's design it well. The thing that we're going to do next month, let's have an idea about it, but be ready to change. The thing we're going to do 3 months from now, let's not waste time designing it right now. Let's know it's a target with an objective, but design it when we get closer to the future. Who knows who's even going to still be working here? So does that respond to your question? Okay, good. One or two more.
You will, Dr. Kenna, your description of how difficult participatory management is when different groups are involved was captivating. Did I hear you mention that you might do some work in the Polynesian islands? And would that include Samoa, Tonga, Niue? In that case, because this may have a reflection also on the Micronesian islands that are around this part of the Pacific, the question would be, is there a significant role or a positive effect that the figure of the big man, the big leader, the recognized leader in the community can play in somehow guiding or facilitating participatory management?
A lot in there. I'm going to give a brief, I'm going to reduce my answer not to the scale of the question. First, I want to say I haven't worked in Micronesia or Melanesia. So here's what I would say to you. Not just the big man, but elders even more. But both. But not just the human beings who occupy those statuses, but also the things, we would call them rituals and ceremonies. And I would say also the cultural devices that are in play to be able to either resolve conflict or not resolve it. So for example, hosting, as in going over to somebody's house for dinner and where everybody sits and those kinds of things. Those things are just as important as the roles of the people. So there's a lot in your question. I want to, let's see how fast I can speed through this. Come on, giddy up. I want to get to, I'm going to sort of whip through the next part quick. And that is executive authority. Now, if you think what I just showed you is linear, and I hope you understand, what is linear at the 50,000 foot level is not linear at the month-by-month level. In the same way as if we say, children go through the terrible twos, and then they go through 5 years of latency, and then they go through adolescence. Those words all have meaning for everybody in the room. But when you're actually going through any one of those stages, the actual experience of the day by day is completely different than that linear 50,000 abstract level would make it sound. But there's still value in being able to think at a high level of abstraction. And that's what I'm going to continue to do for one more set, which is I want to talk about authority that way, high level. So first, I want to distinguish between 3 types of authority. Executive authority, whether we like it or not, there are sources of power, sources of money, sources of control that are the initiators of some collaboratives. Some collaboratives take a lot to get off the ground. And I'm going to focus this next part on executive authority. But the subject matter expertise, that has a different authority to it. That has the authority of reason. And we'll get to that one And that authority, well, we'll get there. And the same thing with process management and design. Okay, executive authority, we could be talking about executive sponsors, in which case it's often one or two people, like, you know, the sponsoring CEO or the sponsoring director of the health department. Or we could be talking about a board of directors that convenes, especially in a large organization like UC or Kaiser. You can have a board-led initiative that's so cross-functional it feels cross-sector. And the board could be hierarchical, or the board could be composed of a lot of diversity. Or you could have a steering group where the steering group itself is cross-sector, different authority, different levels of power in the executive group. Given that, I'm going to use the steering group diagram for the rest, but it doesn't mean I favor it, it just means I had to pick one. So at the start of an initiative, here's a hypothetical initiative. By now, you should be able to read this. And now, at the start, the reason that I've grayed the picture out is because what I'm trying to get across here is it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't even been drawn yet. It hasn't even been conceived yet. At the very start, some group of thinkers comes together to do some thinking about a collaboration. Again, this might be funders, or it might be a community-based activist group. But somebody gets it started. And here's what I would recommend as the practice that will save you the most grief over the lifetime of your collaborative, is if this is the executive's scope. They set the mission and the overall goals. And this doesn't just mean by sitting in a room themselves. It could take them 5 years to set it. They could have all the input they want. They define the major stages with milestones or outputs for each stage. They create a stakeholder engagement map. They do the high-level designing that allows them to make, if there are key people, if there are a few key people in the community, such as the leader that you're talking about, they can identify them, they can show them the thinking as a way to get their engagement. They define the infrastructure needed to perform the work of each stage effectively, and they set the overall spending levels for this thing. Now, much of this is going to change over time. This is a 50,000-foot conceptualization. But if there is this kind of framework at the beginning, it's very helpful later, because as people evolve out of any of these things, there's a way to talk about it. And that's the key thing. This thinking is more for the purpose of communication than it is for the purpose of rigid adherence to anything. Let me show you the same point, but I want to show it to you visually now. So here's the same work done at the start of an initiative. Here, what you're looking at right now is an arbitrary time frame within which the collaborative's work is going to be envisioned to occur. And the slash mark at the end, as you'll see, sort of is symbolizing, okay, we've hit our goals. So the first two steps of thinking are set the mission of the initiative, either in detail or roughly, and set the overall goals of the initiative. Get clear of the purpose and scope of the big picture. Okay, so here's an example of what that means. This is an actual case. The mission was to improve utilization of neighborhood parks in a small city that didn't have money to do anything new, but they were looking for policy regulations and, you know, ways that they were creating red tape and bureaucracy that was stopping people from using the parks. So their goal was to reduce barriers and restrictions and to create new incentives. And a condition had to be non-financial, that it was revenue neutral. Okay, so that was the starting place that got them to the table. Then the next step that I'm saying is very helpful to do at a high level. Set the stages and the milestones and set the stakeholder engagement map at the high level, the level I've been showing you. So here in their case are the stages that they set. For better or worse, let's define the problem, let's create the new policy, let's build support. And if I had time, I could assign you now, I'm sorry, here's one more thing. Here's the outputs they set for each of these. The outputs for problem definition, when we're done this stage, we will have explored the difficulties, we'll have identified our current policies such as they are. At the end of stage 2, we'll have new policy recommendations. At the end of stage 3, we'll have our new policy proposals endorsed by the public or revised by the public. Okay, this is a vision. This is not a operational implementation. It's a way to think. Now, if we were here for a long time, I could give you an assignment right now. Draw the stakeholder map for each stage. Using the icons I gave you or any new ones you wanted to come up with. And you would be able to think within this logic model about stakeholders. And I'll show you at this level, this is the level of work that the pink group is doing. They basically do that. Okay? And basically that stakeholder engagement maps translates into, we want a lot of community input at the beginning, we want less community input and more core group work internally in the middle, and then we want to engage the community more to show them what we did and find out if it's going to work for them in the third stage. Do you see that? So they were able to draw this map easily at this high level of abstraction once they got clear on the goals. And what I'm suggesting to you is to locate the function of the executive at this high level, at the overall level, to do this kind of thinking. It's very different than the expertise level that would go on inside of any of those circles. And now, what I'd like, okay, I've got one more point to make, which is I just showed you what happened at the beginning. Now I want to take a look at the same group of people between, because they don't go away, because nothing ever turns out the way you thought it would turn out. Because now we're going from 50,000 feet down to what's really true. And so if I was in that framework of reasons why collaborations fail, I would say one really good reason why they fail is that that design at the beginning is treated as that it has to be exactly that way and that it can't change. That's a recipe for a lot of heartbreak. Because you can't be smart enough to be able to predict the future. Now, what's the review here? It's pretty straightforward. Somebody, these sponsors, they review the work of the stage just completed. They make a determination about whether it's good enough or whether they want to kick it back for more work. They endorse the goals of the next stage, which means often they revise the goals of the next stage. They make adjustments in the overall plan, and they allocate the specific money and resources for the next stage out of that overall spending pot that they committed to at the beginning. Now, again, same point, but now back to our actual case. Same point. Here, the picture you're looking at is what got done at the front end, and then here, the real point is that, come on, giddy up. Whoops, we lost it, but I'll go back. What this diagram should have done is that where those arrows are, that those arrows should have been replaced by the return of the pink group. That the pink group rethinks and does those things at the end of every stage. Okay, I appreciate everybody sort of coming back to put our focus, because it gives whoever's about to talk a chance to have everyone's attention. So who would like to have a comment or question? Got time for 3 or 4. Anybody? Yes, here's one over there. 2. Got you 2. How about if I see 3 and 4? Okay, well, okay, there's 3. Let's go ahead.
So I understand that the model can be any way, and it looks fine. I'm just struggling with the executive authority, the peak group.
Yeah.
How does that? Does who that is change over time? I mean,
could let's say, you know, look, let's say. For example, in the case of Healthy Christchurch, since we have that one in common, so the district health department, district's bigger than Christchurch, like a region, went to the World Health Organization and submitted a grant proposal, a grant request to get a few $1 million. So then the money came back with there were originally 9 signatories to essentially guarantee that the money would be used well. And the health department was one of the 9. And the biggest hospital in town, CEO, was one of the 9. And the physicians union was one of the 9. And a patients' rights advocacy group was one of the 9. And the Association of Substance Abuse Counselors was one of the 9. And also the Parks and Recreation was one of the 9. So with those 9 signatories, that group made the commitment to the funder, and therefore they became the pink group for that process. Now, they stayed the 9 through that whole first stage, which ran them about 6 or 8 months, and then at that point they opened it up to thinking teams to do the process design, et cetera, et cetera. But when the charter was signed, which now had 200 people, now the pink group has to reform. Because now it doesn't have to be the 9 anymore. Now it's some representative core group out of the 200 that carries the ball. But then they have to go through the bureaucracy back with the World Health Organization again to get, to get reauthorized type thing. So it can change, yeah. But a core point that I've been elaborating on is where money is involved and where people's lives are involved and where political will and all of the real things in our world are involved, there is some locus of accountability. And the effort to confuse the locus of accountability in the long run is it's not a power strategy. It's a city of Berkeley strategy. It's accountability can shift and grow and change. But to distort it and confuse it makes investors and people, you heard the person stand up earlier today and said, I just realized why I can get out of some of these collaboratives. So when people are willing to hold themselves accountable and when a system of enterprise is ready to hold certain people accountable, that doesn't mean forever about all things, but it strengthens your system to have locus of accountabilities. Okay, who was second? Over here. Yes.
Okay, so there are 6 of us, or there were 6 of us at this table.
Yes?
And I think indicative of collaborations, we had a wide range of reactions to the first hour. And I won't speak for other folks, I'll only speak for myself. But first of all, I want to thank you for demystifying the topic, which I think was, at least from my point of view, we began with a kind of a mystified topic of a non-hierarchical process. I think this conversation here and with you brought back into focus the fact that there are power processes here that we need to be aware of and stay aware of. But I also think I want to thank you for bringing an anthropological human, embedding this in humanity in a cross-cultural, dynamic, multi-social, multi-class structural environment. And by saying that there's not a formula, one formula for making this happen, but that you have to make it organic and take all of these things into consideration that you brought up, and that it's going to be different in different parts of the world. So I guess my bottom line is this is humans, and I appreciate that you brought that back to the table instead of some kind of a diagram that had none of it in there.
And it's coming even more deeply into focus in another 5 minutes. Who was third? Yeah.
I'd actually like to pick up that theme because I actually think that given the humanity, I feel like this could cloud the humans who've been oppressed for decades or centuries, even, perhaps. So you mentioned accountability.
I can't hear you.
You mentioned accountability.
Yes.
And in talking about accountability, how do you balance, on the one hand, an unfolding process, and on the other hand, a transparency, so that all stakeholders have a sense of not only what will happen at the end of 3 months or a year, but where we're going, so that there is a possibility to recall representatives to organizations who aren't representing the interests of their constituencies. So where does that sort of recall come into play potentially?
Yeah.
And where is the transparency when it seems like, well, we won't know where we'll be yet. Let's get to the end of this stage, and then we'll know what the goals are, as opposed to a transparency that will allow for actual accountability.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll talk about, there's two things that are in there: transparency and accountability to representatives and ability to recall. Two separate points I want to make. One is that this I can't emphasize this enough. In my first part, when I was giving you icons, I was giving you, you might think of them as letters of the alphabet, or you might think of them as nouns and verbs in a very simple language. It's a graphic language, but it's a language that everyone can learn to use. I don't care if you use mine, and many of my clients, they see these and they come up with their own things. That's fine. But here's my point, is if you can't show it and say it, you can't see it. If you can't see it, it's not transparent. So a big element in making your collaborative effort transparent is to publish the goals, to publish the logic model about how these goals are going to be achieved, and to publish the groupings of people who are being charged with the responsibility to achieve the steps towards reaching the goals. If you can't communicate that stuff, it won't get published. Things that are very vague renderings of that stuff, like the names of people in some vague group, like so-and-so members of our steering committee, gets published without any articulation of what their scope of authority is or what their sphere of responsibility is. And so what I'm offering you on that whole thing is, I don't care at all if you use my language, but use some way to show nouns and verbs of stages and outputs in a context that has purpose and vision inside of it. I'm offering you one that is really simple, that my clients can use for large communities of other people to be able to challenge, push back on, question, add, subtract from. So that's so I'm saying to you, transparency is a discipline, it's not just a value. So I'm going to fly through some group dynamics elements here. I want to take us back here. Now, in theory, this group is multicultural, whatever it was designed to be, but it's multi-stakeholder. And the point at this high level is these are the nerve center of a collaborative architecture. The executive sponsoring authority that draws the big goals is not where the action is. The substantive thinking is in your thinking teams. And these are the groups that are changing. These are the groups that are being touched by each other. When they obtain input, they evaluate and incorporate it. They push on each other. And they make the choice about when their work is good enough to pass it on. But their group dynamics within those groups, especially if there are people in the groups who can't possibly imagine each other's lives and backgrounds, especially then, it's a huge, difficult problem. And yet we have some fantasy that a healthy discussion looks like this picture. This is a picture, each line of circles and arrows here is meant to represent one person in a group, one person's line of thoughts. And as this picture is shown, what it's meant to represent is a fantasy that every person in a group goes more or less at the same pace as each other. They track each other, they're on board every step of the way, and they come to a shared decision in a nice, dignified, mutually supportive process. And that is supposedly a healthy group discussion. The problem is that when our own groups don't measure up to anything like this, we think it's because our groups are dysfunctional. But that's sad, because this is not how diverse multi-stakeholder groups look. This would be a little bit better of a picture, which is that as soon as people get their sea legs, they start going off into directions that may or may not relate to the goals, may or may not be meaningful to each other, may or may not even make sense to themselves. So what does this mean? Does this mean this is not healthy, and the only thing that is healthy is the little sanitized center? So this question has been struggled with by group theorists for a long time, and my own rendering of it is this is a helpful model. It's not a perfect model. To understand that you can watch groups go through a pattern over and over through this pattern of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. That you can have times in the life of a group where they are going off in different directions, and that's normal. And there are other things you can do to bring them more into convergence with each other. And this particular model is in use a lot in the business world. And I'll show you how it works. Okay, it's helpful for business meetings when a leader or manager is the decision maker. I'll show you how this works. When a leader is the decider, the leader poses a question, gets people's reaction. It can be all over the wall. The leader has obtained input, and now they can focus the group. They can say, okay, I've heard a lot of things. I want us to now focus on item 1 and 2 and focus the group toward a discussion and bring them into more convergence if they allow them some time. Now, so like I said, that's a style it's very leader-centric, and it's called consultative decision-making. There's the leader in green, the group members inputting to the leader. The objective of the leader is to get input for deciding, and the group process is the leader raises an issue and asks for reactions, the members give their input, the leader decides. Now, one feature of this to notice is if you were a group member, not the leader, if you were the group member in this kind of a meeting, who are you trying to influence? The leader. And so if you're person number 2, you might have a little conversation with person number 3, but person number 3 can have a difference of opinion. That's not really the point. It's what the leader comes to conclude that matters in this. However, like I said, the divergent convergent model works great for typical leader-driven meetings, but as a framework for participatory decision-making, something is missing. Something significant is missing, because in participatory decision-making, here's the story. Even if there is a leader, even if there's somebody in that room who is the sponsor, convener, power holder, funder, president, CEO, whatever they are, if they've made a commitment that the group is trying to think it through together, then the leader's objective is to develop an agreement that's acceptable to all parties. And the process, all parties are in the give and take. And the views of all stakeholders are included in the final decision. The decisions are inclusive. People have had to influence each other. Now, can you see from this picture the extra pressure on group dynamics that participatory decision-making puts, even on a group that is trying to support divergence? It's not enough to influence a leader. You're influencing each other process. So this divergent, convergent thinking model doesn't really get to that. And what's missing as a representation of group dynamics is the struggle that goes on. Our conversation would be a little tiny little example of what I'm talking about. But what is this? Is this a struggle to hate each other or kick each other out of the group or a power struggle? In my opinion, our conversation and many others in group dynamics, it's a struggle in the service of integration. In other words, to understand each other's point of view. Whether or not we could possibly achieve it in 5 minutes is a different question. But a participatory process, a collaborative process, has to allow diverse stakeholders the time to go through the growing zone. So I'd like you to turn to a couple of people near you and just react to this idea that a collaborative, diverse group, face-to-face group, is going to go through lots of iterations of these different zones of experience in order to build shared understanding with each other. Just talk with each other about that. If I could just get you back for 1 second. Here's a little better question. How about trying on this model for a bit? This is a group dynamics model. It's not perfect. Try it on this way. Ask yourself and share maybe, and this is why another 1 or 2 people talk, not the whole table, but ask yourself, like, well, have I been in a group that this framework, this language helps me understand any of the dynamics that I've been seeing or that I had seen in such and such a group? And again, don't get hung up on the fact that I'm only showing one iteration. In a real group, these things iterate over and over and over again before you finally build shared understanding. But try on that question. Tell each other some war stories. How helpful is this model? What ways is this model not helpful? But talk about some real world cases for the next 7 minutes. Go ahead. I'm going to take 3 or 4 comments or questions, but I got a question for you. Is it as hot down there as it is up here? Woo! Okay. All right. Anybody got the bathing suit? Anyway, who would like to? Who has something to share? Anyone? Questions, comments? Really? Let me give you another few seconds in case anyone has something you would like to raise. Here's one. Anyone else? 2, 3. Go ahead.
We were just discussing the fact that the 2 different designs that you showed, one would really require you to be a leader and one would require you to be a facilitator as the person trying to move the decision-making process through. And our question is, do you think it's possible to do both, to be both?
Well, okay, here's the deal. Just for frame of reference, let's define the leader's basic mission to influence people and reach a decision themselves, and the facilitator's basic mission is to support a group to do its best thinking. Is it possible to do both? Sure. I'm the owner of a business. I don't bring in a facilitator every time I engage with my staff. But I do bring in a facilitator when the engagement I want to have with my staff has certain variables attached to it, when the discussion is high stakes, when I need everyone to think it through together because I want everybody to understand together, when I expect that everybody has a piece of the truth and we don't automatically know how other people are going to think about it, and I need it to be, a shared outcome. And when the topic area is complicated, with those criteria, for sure. And the reason that I would bring in a facilitator then is because in that small case when I'm in the leader, business owner role, my issues of authority, my responsibility to influence the group and be accountable for outcomes and stuff, that's too important. I'm actually speaking to you in your role as leaders. It's too important to be sort of dinking around with process management, energy management, making sure Joe understands Mary, all of the other things that go into being facilitative. So I split the roles when the stakes are high enough, in order to strengthen everybody. It also improves the trust and all the rest of it. There's, I wish we had all day. And so I'm just going to plunge ahead with this next point that is continuing to integrate, which is once you start understanding that a diverse group is a real challenge for people who have to talk across all of these different frameworks, and that there's going to be a struggle, trying to understand consensus agreement with that in mind, then it enriches the question of what do we do about it. So here's what it's not. If I asked you what's wrong with this picture, you could probably give me a lot of answers. But, okay. But I obviously chose it partly for the cultural provocations also, so I could acknowledge that. But I want to illustrate even something just technical about what you're seeing right now. That is not the cultural dimension, just one small thing, which is the question itself. Is everyone okay with that? Or some variation, That question it's a closed-ended question. It sets people up to think in a yes-no thing. And the problem is that yes and no in response to how am I with an issue at hand, the yes and the no have to do a lot of work. The yes on this, yes to no is a continuum. It's not a bifurcation. Yes could mean, I love this idea. If we do this, I will stay late. I'll come in weekends. I'll work 6 days a week for this. This is really important to me. Or yes could mean, okay, if I have to go with it, all right, but I'm really not crazy about it. Or everything in between. It could mean, I basically like it, but there's some things I still don't understand. Same thing with no. No could mean, I hate this. If we do this, I'm going to start circulating my resume. But no could also mean, can we just talk about this for another 15 minutes? I really don't get the point yet. And everything in between. So that's among other things, the language of the mechanics of reaching agreement is its own problem. Now, this is a tool that was referenced this morning by Mid-City Can, and some others of you may have seen it. This is the Gradients of Agreement Scale. It's been translated into many languages, not by me, but we've been shown it, and we get requests, 2 or 3 times a month for people to publish this in many places. And there's some things I want to teach you about it. But what do you notice right away when you see this? Is that if the facilitator or the person in charge or whoever's asking the group, how are people with this proposal? People get to respond at a level that is closer to what they really mean. Now, I'll show you a couple things about this. First of all, this is a variation, different words. There's no veto. There's only 6 points. There's no abstain. This particular version was developed by one of my clients, Piero Midiar. He's the founder of eBay. He's still the chairman of eBay. But in his own philanthropy organization, it's called the Midiar Network. When he was doing the high-end strategy and reorganization, he used this scale. And the thing I want to point out right now is I start out by showing my clients or colleagues the generic one that you saw a minute ago. And then I teach them some stuff like I'm teaching you. And then I ask them, how do you want to change it to make it work for you and your group and your culture? And rarely does a group stay with the same points that I showed them. Much more commonly, they tweak it, they make it their own. Many groups bring it down to 5. I'm telling you this for your own application. 5 is the minimum, by the way. This is research from the University of Michigan, Institute for Social Research, Likert scale. Less than 5 points on a scale, you can't get reliable data. People mean different things by the same point. So here's a hypothetical group. I'm using the 6-point scale. Here's a hypothetical group asked a question after a bunch of discussion. How do you feel about this proposal that's now in front of us after our discussion? If you saw this level of support for a proposal, how much would you trust the implementation? Reasonable? Okay, it may not be perfect. You may not be able to get perfect given time, people, who knows what, but I'm going to make a contrast. So let's just call this enthusiastic support as a label. I want to contrast it with a different spread. Let's say same proposal, but now let's say this was the spread. Now notice a couple things. There's nobody over on the right-hand side. Also, the 1, 2, and 3, there's 7 of them, and there's only 3 of the others. So if this was a vote, you have a supermajority on the side of go for it. How much would you trust the implementation of this spread? This is a very powerful use of gradients of agreement to be able to see the difference. These are both unanimous agreements. So now, when is this good enough, though? If you were making a decision as a group, like, should we start next week's meeting half an hour later, and you got this spread, maybe that's good enough for that issue. What circumstances is this good enough for? Sorry? Low stakes is a key one. What else?
Small number of options.
Sorry?
Small number of options on the table.
Maybe, maybe not. But what if the options were drop a nuclear bomb on somebody? I'm kidding, but
I'll take it.
here I'll answer my own question. I'll answer my own question because I just whoops. I won't answer my own question. I'll recite an answer for you. Small stakes is one time. Another time is when most of the people in the room aren't even affected by it. And in those situations when people come in to report what they're doing, and if the two people on the left are the two people who are the implementers, that might possibly be another time. A key time is issues that have a very short lifetime, where you can do pilots, small bets, where you can get something done fast, fail it, learn from it, move on to something better. So small, not just low stakes, but small time frames. You don't have to be perfect. I just want to get to this next page. There's some mechanics to reach closure in a consensus group. I want you to see how it works. One is make sure everybody understands we're stepping back from the discussion for long enough to take a poll. Get the proposal down some way so everybody can see it. It's not enough if a secretary writes it in the minutes. You need people to, in a collaborative process with diverse stakeholders, there's going to be diversity of opinion about what's getting agreed to. Get it in front of them. It's another transparency issue. Take the poll that I showed you, and then, well, let me show you how this works. Let's say you take a poll early. The leader has obtained input. They now state a proposal, they take a poll. You don't know if there's agreement or not. You haven't had a struggle, and you get this result early. How many of you, as the leader, would say, okay, it's enough, I'm going to go forward? How many of you would say, no, we need to talk more? How many would go forward? I see the sign. How many of you would go forward? Okay, a small handful. How many of you would kick it back for more discussion? Okay, a larger handful, and about 50% of the room didn't raise your hand. But that's okay. In this case, though, I want to just use this as an example of, let's just say the stakes were small and it wasn't a perfection decision. It's really important. Let's just say that was a decision that you can make now, move ahead, fail with it, learn something from it, and make a better one in action rather than trying to get it perfect in print before you act. Let's just say it's one of those. So the leader decides to go ahead, make the decision. Then, in that case, here's what the story was. The leader can focus the discussion, bring the group to closure, and now, at this point, what we're saying is that this was a consultative process. It leads to a leader's decision. It's not a participatory process, or it's a point within a larger collaborative activity where a conclusion was reached. It's not worth it to this group of people to have to be perfect on every single issue. So that decision was made, and then you implement that idea, whatever it was. But supposing the support is not adequate, supposing this was the support, and now, instead, you have the call, the group should discuss it further. Now, what this means, and this is part of my response to a couple of your questions, what this looks like in group process is you're kicking it back for more discussion. Guess what you're doing? You're basically, once you've uncovered that a group does not have a lot of easy agreement, you're basically prepare yourself because you're going to go into the groan zone. Now, at that point, what we're talking about now is you're going to take those disagreements and deal with them. And your objective when you're working with them is if you're helping people to resolve their misunderstandings, it means you're putting in the time to help them understand each other. Okay, so after some discussion, try again. Take a poll, maybe not, maybe you still need more discussion again. Stay in the groan zone. At a certain point, when the support reaches a critical mass, now you can bring the group to closure. And that's a participatory process with a shared decision. My time is telling me I've got 5 minutes total, so let me take 2 or 3 comments, and let me start with, can you get a microphone on this time? And can I have 1 or 2 more before we run out of time? And here's going to be one.
my question was, how would you tailor this to like a low-income immigrant community? Sometimes I've dealt with groups that are low literate, and I mean, this is good for me, the gradient, but how would you tailor that?
You got to put up a little higher. How would you do this with low-income groups?
Low literate.
Illiterate groups.
Low literate, yeah.
Everything about everything I've been showing you about communication has to take into account the range of factors that include not just education level, but communication skills, language variations. The designers have to solve that problem. So I don't have a formula answer, but you have to figure out a way. Again, it's not meant to be a panacea for every community, but that question is a question that people have to tackle when they're trying to engage. And the last thing on that is the standard practice for tackling education differences and other cultural variations goes back to the earlier conversation we were having, is you don't try to do it to them. You bring people into the process that can be the answer, who are part of that other way of being, and you find a way to bridge the gap. Yes.
Have you ever had a time when you have had this stakeholder process and you have the groan period and you poll and you rediscuss and you re-poll and you rediscuss and you re-groan and you re-poll and you come up with the same not so great results? Do you have a strategy for those times? Like, let's get on to the next point. Even apparently this group is not going to come to agreement on this, like a specific consensus building process that you use.
Well, it wouldn't be consensus building. Right? So yeah, the book that was waved at you, there's like a couple of chapters on that thing, but there's a lot of things that you can do. You can bargain for more time to deal with that issue. You can take the people who have the farthest opinions, the farthest differences, and form them into a task force to go away and duke it out. And sort of hang with it until they come to resolution. You can conclude that people are not in good faith right now, and we have to take it off the table. So there's a lot of things, but those are techniques. And I want to make sure that I respond to this the most important way, which is a massive amount of people behaving as though they can never reach agreement, is that the step is being totally skipped of helping them understand where each other's coming from. Because this is the big punchline, is to reach a consensus decision about a difficult topic. The purpose of these collaborations, it's not just so people can collaborate, come to compromise, business as usual, go through the motions of old business. You're trying to find a brand new innovation that transcends the categories that you started with, that you're stuck in. And the way that you get there is by understanding each other's thinking and integrating each other's thinking into your own perspective. It's not about giving up what you care about. It's about adding what you care about and also thinking about the other person's needs too. The way good marriages have to learn to do. It's that human dimension of learning to think from each other's point of view. Now, it looks like I have 2 minutes. Is that right, sign holder? What have I got? Okay, let's just summarize this. I want to just quickly bring you one more thing. The other type of authority, a process design team. This morning somebody referenced the importance of an outside facilitator. I just want to build on that one more bit for you. It's not necessarily outside or inside, but there's an infrastructure function. So here is a straightforward design. You're looking at it right now. A process design team figures out, let's get people X, Y, Z together. Let's build in 3 meetings for them. This is straightforward. And then, once they've started to meet, the process design team can facilitate, or they can do the data communication, or they can do the meeting scheduling. They can do the infrastructure needs. They also have the capacity to anticipate that there's going to be a groan zone in a way that the people in the room may not really know. They have the ability to design the meeting so that they could do the first meeting could be an orientation, and they'll get into the struggle in meeting 2. Those are design decisions that the green group can make, or they can design it so that they have a long, tough meeting and then an implementation meeting, etc. Those are simple ones. Here's a more complicated version of the same point. A process design team might be the one that takes that 50,000 picture and brings that stage down into its reality. And then, again, once the action is underway, they do the support work, the infrastructure work. Facilitation is a piece of it, lots of pieces. So this group is your project management group for a collaboration. If you don't have that group who can struggle with the kinds of issues we've been talking about all these 2 days, you know, you're living in a tent. You're not living in a home. So I've run out of time. So I'll just end by telling you that if you want to get a PDF version of this, just to remind you, you can write me or you can give me or Gloria your business card. But thank you very much for letting me spend this time with you. We're out. So thanks.